This is Pamela Kuhn, and the curtain is up on Center Stage, the show about the arts and the artists behind their work. The Stamford Symphony made a bold decision moving into their post-COVID era to rebrand themselves and move forward with a new energy that shone, living up to their new name, Orchestra Lumos. And move forward they have, with a variety of large and small concerts, chamber music, and a clever and highly entertaining educational outreach. They have fulfilled the pledge to broaden their scope as a creative organization. I have always admired their savvy, but now they have garnished my respect with the panache in which they have crafted their brand. And Orchestra Lumos is hosting a beautiful weekend concert series on November 11th and 12th, featuring the brilliant young pianist Tony Siqi Yun. The performance features the work of Gabriela Lena Frank, the Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto No. 2, and the Enigma variations of Edward Elgar. Music director of Orchestra Lumos, Michael Stern, ably takes the podium for these two concerts. And I am delighted to have with me the ascending star, Tony Siqi Yun, to speak about his career thus far and his presentation of work with Maestro Stern, and of course, Michael Stern himself of Orchestra Lumos. Welcome, gentlemen, to Center Stage. It is such an honor to have you.
Thank you.
Very happy to be here.
It's great. And I gather you've just come off concerts in Edmonton, Alberta, I believe, in Canada.
Yes. And yes, where we played Tchaikovsky Piano Concerto No. 2, and there was on the program as well Mozart. Maybe Maestro, you should talk about it. The rest of the
well, the key thing for Tony for this next few minutes is the fact that he played for the first time the second concerto of Tchaikovsky, and this week he is playing also for the first time the second concerto of Rachmaninoff. So 2 seconds, 2 firsts, and a lot of notes in between.
And no one at home plate, right? I love this. Tony, these are big pieces. I mean, you're coming out of the chute at the age 22 with big repertoire. You know, I've noticed everything you've got online, what you're passionate about, or the late Romantics, it seems, the music of Bach Busoni, for instance. I mean, you know, this is a big technical technique we're talking about. I'm not doubting you for 1 minute, but is that your inner passion?
Well, you know, it's always fun to kind of like show off a little bit on stage with this music because there are many places where you can't do that. But you know, I see this as these technical things as a way for the composer and for me to express ourselves, and not just as technical stuff. So yeah, I mean, I also like to sit in front of a piano for a few hours, just kind of tackle different technical issues I may have, and I love looking for different fingerings, especially to make it easier. I think I might have gotten this from my previous teacher, Matti Recalio, who is, is crazy about fingerings. He's very passionate about finding the right fingering. So, I mean, I like doing that, and I love practicing it. And especially when you have like a very difficult passage and you practice it for hours and hours, and once it gets better, it's a very fulfilling feeling. So, I really like the process.
So I've read about you. You're the guy that closes Juilliard. I mean, you're in the practice room all the time. They have to literally kick you out. And I believe, right behind you, you're in a dance studio at Juilliard right now, which is marvelous.
Yeah, which I don't think I'm supposed to be here, but no one's
no one's going to throw you out.
No, not yet.
So Tony, tell me, I gather that you come from a family of non-musicians, and you were originally from Canada. How is it that you've just been born with this ability, first of all, musically, and also you like to be, so to speak, in front of the camera? I mean, you love performing.
Yes, I mean, I'm not sure I love being in front of the camera, but I like being on stage and performing for people. And I've had this since very young. I mean, I remember when I was, 5 or 6, I did not really like practicing, but I just, every chance I get, even just to play for my teacher, I take each lesson as some kind of performance, and
Mm.
still to this day. So I mean, yes, I really like playing for people, and I like the feeling of sharing this my passion with people, and seeing and for feeling the way they react to my music. I mean, this whole process, I really enjoy doing it.
Well, it has been enjoyed by many, and you have been the first prize winner and the gold medalist in the 2019 China International Music Competition. That you are the recipient of the 2023 Rheingau Music Festival's Lotto Förderpreis. And you're the recipient of the Jerome L. Green Fellowship at the Juilliard School. I think you've got a fantastic stable of awards behind you already at your young age.
Well, I'm really honored to get those, and especially the most recent one, the Rheingau Prize. Well, it's not something that you compete for, because I played a recital at the Rheingau Music Festival in Germany. I didn't know I was being considered for the prize, um, and and this first recital was in 2022, and all I know is that I was being invited to the 2023 Summer Festival at Rheingau, and then a few months before the recital, I got an email from my manager saying they've chosen you as the 2023 recipient of this prize. I mean, the people who've gotten it have been so strong, and I mean, I'm really honored to have been awarded this prize.
And as I understand, this is a prize out of the lottery, which is kind
Yeah,
of interesting, you know?
I think it's being sponsored by the Lotto Hessen lottery company, and yeah, it was being rewarded, I think, by someone from the lottery.
Very
It's
cool.
like it's like I won the lottery.
No, we have won the lottery with your playing. And I'm
Oh,
sure that Michael Stern can attest to that right now. Michael, what has it been like working with this young, brilliant ascending star?
It was lovely. We had concerts last week. He blazed through this Tchaikovsky Second Piano Concerto, which is a little bit of an odd duck, but actually a very exciting piece and very different. Certainly very different from the famous Concerto Number One. Um, and we threw ourselves into it together, and it came off really successfully. He had a great success both with the orchestra and the public, and we had a lot of fun. And so here we are this week in a much more well-known vehicle for piano and orchestra. Um, the second concerto, along with its older brother, the third or younger brother, well, cousin, the third concerto, are two of the most widely played and popular concerti in the repertoire, and it's going to be great to jump in again with a slightly different musical aesthetic, but still very Russian, very pianistic, very virtuosic, um, and also um, very substantial for the orchestra. There are certain pieces, um, the Chopin piano concerti come to mind, where the orchestra is really in the background. They serve little else but to play a couple of tutis by themselves and then really accompany in the shadows. There are certain other works, starting with big pieces like the Beethoven Emperor Concerto, and certainly all of this big romantic repertoire like Tchaikovsky, Rachmaninoff, where the orchestra is a prominent actor and a huge, a really important symphonic foil against which, or with which, or upon which the solo piano can do its thing. So it's a really lovely feeling when you have somebody that you're in simpatico with, and clearly there was a lot of very easy communication with Tony right off the bat. You can play around with freedom and yet keep the line, the discipline of the music going, and that's going to be a lot of fun because there are many different ways to play Rachmaninoff, and he knew so well. I mean, Tony can speak to this, but he knew so well, being a great pianist himself, how to write for the piano.
Mm-hmm.
And Rachmaninoff's hands were very large, and the intricacy and the complexity of, especially with inner voices and so forth, but just the sheer physicality of the piece was something very new. I mean, he certainly advanced what it was that the piano was capable of. So yeah, these are going to be great concerts next weekend.
It's exciting. Last year, I covered the monumental project of Pegasus the Orchestra in New York City when they did all 5 of the Rachmaninoff orchestral piano pieces in one evening. I can't tell you what a thrill that was. I mean, to see the genesis of everything, even though they had not been written in the order that they are numbered, which I think is interesting. So the Piano Concerto Number 2 actually came out of his work with a hypnotist, as I understand, when Rachmaninoff was suffering from severe depression.
That's correct. Yeah, he was I don't know if he was a psychiatrist or a neurologist, but certainly Rachmaninoff was struggling with mental stability and depression, and he was also suffering from terrible writer's block, and I think it had to do with the reception of his previous work, and also his inability to find any kind of peace. And Tony can back me up on this. I think he was so grateful. I think his name was Nikolai Dahl.
Dahl, D-A-H-L, yes. Mm-hmm.
Was the physician, and he was so grateful to him that he dedicated the piece.
Correct.
Yes.
Absolutely. So, Tony, what are your first impressions of the Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto Number 2? And is this the first Rachmaninoff that you have performed publicly?
Yes, I think so. I think it's the first piano concerto by Rachmaninoff I've ever performed. Well, in terms of first impression, I really can't remember because I mean this piece is just so well known, and I've been knowing it since when I first started playing the piano. So I mean, with any Rachmaninoff's music, there's just this overwhelming feeling of emotion, of like of the density of the music. And I mean, my impression now is that I just can't wait to perform it. I mean, I've worked on it so much, and there's just so many things I can't wait to discuss with the orchestra and with Maestro Stern. Yeah, I mean, it's a very exciting thing coming up.
When I think of the Concerto Number 2, I think of the famous singing lines. I mean, how important is that to you, Tony, in your work? I know when I speak to every pianist, they talk about the importance of singing, as they play, but even more so in this piece, it seems to me.
Definitely. I mean, if you compare it to the rest of his piano concerti, this is probably arguably has more singing lines in it, maybe. So, I mean, his singing lines are so long and are so stretched out, and sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to kind of hold the line together to hold it as long as it can be held. So there's that, but then once you get it, it's like it's like Rachmaninoff using music to express or to talk about his soul, using these long lines, these long harmonic progressions, and yeah, it's wonderful.
It's very exciting, very exciting.
Well, it's no accident. I was just going to add that it's no accident that Rachmaninoff's, first of all, he was a great tunesmith. I mean, he just knew how to write a great melody.
Yeah.
And there is a kind of, and this actually worked against him in some people's mind, not in mine, because I think he was one of the true greats of the early 20th century. But he certainly had one foot firmly steeped in the Russia of the 19th century. So there's this aching, and remember also that he was, when he was in the United States, terribly homesick. And the old joke that you can take the Rachmaninoff out of the Russia, but you can't take the Russia out of the Rachmaninoff.
Right, right.
Or something like that. But there is something so achingly sentimental and nostalgic and probably because of his mindset, a little bit on the sad side, that he writes these melodies which, not surprisingly, were often taken up by Hollywood.
That's right. Film composers. Yep.
The film music aspect of this, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way at all. It's very colorful music that has a lot of narrative in it, right? So there's a lot of adaptability, one would obviously imagine, to using it as a soundtrack for movies. But even without that, as pure music, it's so beautifully written and it's so formally constructed that as a work, it has this kind of natural arc, which is pretty infectious.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question about it. Tony, do you think there's a relationship somehow in the Russianness between Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff's writing for you as a pianist?
Well, yes, definitely. I mean, it's just, their use of the instrument and the vastness of their harmonies, especially. It's very apparent in both Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff, and this sheer, as Maestro talked about, this kind of their use of their Russianness, the Russianness of these melodies are constantly present. So I think those are the two main things that are in common of these two composers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to be even more specific in terms of, and to make it even more personal in terms of what Tony and I did last week as opposed to this week, there was a lot of input from the famous pianist Alexander Siloty to Tchaikovsky around this second piano concerto. In fact, he edited the concerto rather heavily, not necessarily to the concerto's benefit, but was very, very involved in that world. Siloty, and he was a major figure in Russian music. It turns out that Alexander Siloty was the cousin of Rachmaninoff. And the premiere of this piece, I believe, was with Rachmaninoff playing and Siloty himself conducting it.
Oh,
so the idea that in that world, you can even say Stravinsky, who was such an innovator, a modernist, and his music right from the beginning of the 20th century pointed to the future. He was still steeped in this tradition, which Rachmaninoff was so much a part of, which Tchaikovsky was so much a part of, and it came out of Taneyev and Rimsky-Korsakov and Mussorgsky and Balakirev and all these people. There was a really vibrant and energetic culture of music in Russia at the very end of the 19th and into the 20th century. And Rachmaninoff, while being very forward-looking in a way and having written a lot of his music in the United States, definitely was steeped in and inexorably tied to that tradition.
Very exciting. Very exciting. This is great background information for your audience as a précis to this concert this weekend. It's marvelous. Now, Michael, can you tell me more about the program and how this all knits together from Ms. Frank's piece to...
The whole theme of our season this year is about telling stories. And, Tony already alluded to the story behind the creation of the Rachmaninoff, but also the kind of narrative arc in the romanticism of it. We're opening with a piece called Elegia Andina by Gabriela Lina Frank, one of the freshest voices in music today. This was one of her first big pieces. I think it was her first substantial orchestra piece. And it's old now. It's an old piece. It's 22 years old.
Hmm.
And I love the story of this piece because it reflects her own rather complicated and intricate and interesting multiculturalism. In fact, she describes her background, which is Peruvian and Spanish and Chinese and Lithuanian and Jewish and South America. And now she lives in California. And all of that is baked into this music. I mean, there is obviously the Peruvian references, as you would imagine from a piece that was that's called Andean Elegy. But from the Andes, you've got the sound of the instruments, but she also makes perfect reference to her background, which she describes as sort of a mix of Oriental stir-fry cuisine, those are her words, Andean nursery songs, and visits to New York to visit their Jewish cousins. So all of that is kind of in the mix. And, particularly the flute playing sort of imitates the Andean panpipes in terms of the sound world. It's a really wonderful piece, and I think it's a great way to open this program, which ends with the Elgar Enigma Variations, which is one of the great storytelling pieces ever written. It's Edward Elgar's affectionate homage to all of his friends. Each one of these movements is never actually given the title by name. He refers to his friends only with their initials, but he puts into every movement, which is basically a theme and variations. They're always some kind of reworking of the material that he sets up at the beginning, which is by definition a theme and variation work. The conceit being that these are all his friends. So through the prism of his experience with them, this friendship is specific then to each one of these people, including in one rather fun and short variation, his bulldog, who runs along and jumps into the river and barks and so forth. And he has a lovely friend who stutters, and her stuttering is a little bit reflected in the woodwind writing. His publisher and great friend, Jaeger, is the dedicatee of for me, the emotional heart of the piece, the most beautiful movement, which is the Nimrod, the famous Nimrod variation. And his wife is prominently figured, and it's just a brilliant manipulation of the orchestra. From a formal point of view, the way he can take this theme and turn it upside down, and in each case reflect specifically the character and the human aspect of each one of these friends individually. It really is a beautiful, powerful work. It's compact. It's not very long. It's about 30 minutes, but it packs a lot of punch, those many chapters. And it's one of the great orchestral showpieces in the repertoire.
Of all time, yes.
Of all time. So now you have this incredibly varied program, each composer being so different, a brilliant vehicle for, Tony's wonderful piano playing, and two of the most beloved pieces in the repertoire.
So for your audience, it's a real delicacy this weekend, I have to say.
Well, I'm hoping. I like to give them things that I don't like to imagine that we make programs trying to figure out only what they would like. We want them to love what we love, and we love this so much. We're anxious to share it with them.
Yeah.
And so I love that Tony says, "Oh, I can't wait to be with the orchestra and share with them and get into the piece." And that's the kind of enthusiasm and personal connection with the music that translates to the audience. It's not just, "Oh yeah, we're just playing this piece for you." This means something to us, and we really want you to love it as much as we do. And when you have that feeling, then that's a really lovely connection that you can set up with the audience, and makes the case for why live performance is so exciting and so essential and so different than listening even to a marvelous performance on a recording.
Absolutely, absolutely. Would you say that that is the driving factor in your excitement about forming Orchestra Lumos as well? I mean, that you really wanted to take Stanford Symphony in a new direction, that, as you said, in the 21st century, but something that really speaks directly to the people with a wide variety of programming and opportunities.
Well, I do think that the orchestra here in Fairfield County is a gem, and it deserves wider recognition for sure, and we're getting it
Mhm.
quickly. Um, it was for a long time very successful, but more or less tied to Stanford. Um, and I will take exception with only one word you said early on in our talk today, and you talked about our orchestral outreach or educational outreach.
Mhm.
I don't believe in outreach, which sounds a little bit like patronage or slightly paternalistic. I believe in engagement.
Okay.
So when you're asking me about what excites me, taking the orchestra with its new name towards its next steps, it's the idea that, especially after COVID, we cannot continue to do business as usual
Yeah.
because the world changed. But I do think that music is as essential and as urgently um, required as it ever was, probably more than it ever was. I mean, look, I'm delighted to be on stage and to make music and to find new colleagues, both longtime friends and new friends. Um, but I would be lying if I didn't say that it's always on our minds that the world is blowing up
Right.
on all sides. It's the world is on fire, and there seems to be no paucity of of nastiness, disagreement, lack of consensus, lack of optimism, lack of a desire to coexist in a way that uplifts everyone. And there is so much snarky divisiveness, and not to mention true violence, true hatred. Um, there has to be a better way. And
Mm.
obviously, the communication that we need on every level, and certainly in this country, all you have to do is turn on the news and see what's happening, um, socially, politically. There has to be a better way, and I'm firmly convinced that music and the arts have to be part of that mix. And so, when you have the ability to reach out and communicate on a level which is unimpeachably human,
Hmm.
and that's the one thing you can like or dislike music, but it is the most human form of expression.
Yes.
It's wordless. It is, but it's not nonverbal in a sense. It's vocal and verbal being the same. You're a singer, you know what I'm talking about. There is a kind of elemental connectivity which happens when people are receiving, making, listening to music all together that no other art form can, despite the importance of other art forms, but that no other art form can quite match. So that's what I aspire to for the orchestra, and I want to make the case that music can matter, and that when we have young people like Tony who have their entire musical lives ahead of them, and the idea of using music as service to bring something more to the world around one another, that is a very compelling imperative for all of us.
So well said, Michael Stern. So perfectly said. And as I say on my show all the time, music can lift us out of the chaos, music and art. You know, boys, you will be holding everyone's hearts, actually, this weekend with these performances. And I guess for a short time, we can be lifted out of the chaos we see on television. So kudos to both of you for doing that.
And thank
Um,
you, Pamela, for putting Tony and me together as boys.
Yeah.
I'll take it. I absolutely will take it.
Something tells me with both of your senses of humor, that is what it comes to when it gets right down to it. You know what? And you can't ever take the child out of music making. We have to have that beautiful, curious, childlike, response. And I'm sure you bring it, both of you. I'm sure you had a lot of fun at Edmonton, and you will this weekend. In fact,
Yes.
Tony, let me ask you this. I read somewhere that you like to drive.
Oh yes, I love
Okay.
driving. Like
Okay.
yeah.
So, I always feel that there's a correlation between like a sport like that, especially driving and music making, and there's a certain amount of adrenaline. So, you don't get to drive much in New York. I'm sorry, but if you have your ideal car, what would it be?
Oh, there's just been one since I was very young, a Range Rover,
A Range
SUV.
Rover.
I love the car, and yes, it's so yeah. I mean, I love whenever I have a chance, I rent a car, and I drive for the day, like around town or something.
I love
Yeah,
it. I would have never expected Range Rover.
yeah,
From
I think Range Rover. Yeah.
watching you play, I was just determined you were going to say something like an Aston Martin, and you were
Oh, that
going to
too.
like
That
speed.
too. That too.
Yeah,
But I actually like SUVs instead of um lower sports cars.
I love it. I know so many musicians, and I don't know if you agree with this, Michael, but I know so many musicians who actually adore driving. And when they want to think through a piece of music, they get in the car and somehow they're just free to actually find a certain rhythm, in how they move, their speed, and thinking about their music making.
Well, especially on long drives, I think it's one of the last few places where, unless you have, you know, two teenage daughters, as I do, in the back seat, uh, you can actually have some quiet time with no distractions. I mean, yes, we now have cell phones, but you can turn the cell phone off. It used to be long plane rides. Long plane
Mhm.
rides were this haven, but now there's Wi-Fi on the plane, so it's hard to resist.
I know.
The car, you can't really be distracted when you're driving, and so the only thing you can think of is what's in your head, and I think that's part of the appeal. Um, I would ask my friend Tony to consider a more um, environmentally friendly less
Tesla,
gas
yeah.
guzzling alternative to a Range Rover. But I've driven Range Rovers. They are great cars, but they are not necessarily the most practical, maybe.
Well, they probably have EV now or something, so I'll look into that.
Yeah, you look into that.
For the
Yeah.
future, because you are the future,
Yes.
Tony, I tell you.
Gotta
Tony,
be responsible for the future.
so just tell me, how is it when you come to a new piece of music? I mean, what do you have a process? Do you just sit down with a new piece, that's been assigned to you or something you're interested in? Do you just kind of break the back of it and then work with it for a while, or do you just launch right into it?
Well, if this piece is so well known, then I must have heard it before, and that sometimes works against you. But I with every piece, I try to look first of all for the best addition I can get, and then I learned the notes first, um, and then the form, and then maybe at the end I listen to some recordings just to expand my horizon of the piece. But something I don't do is maybe listening to it right from the start, and then maybe just doing that to speed up the learning process. But yeah, I mean, that's basically how I do. I mean, and I always, when traveling, I will study the score without the piano, so it gets really imprinted into my mind.
Mm. So you were the guy on the airplane who's sitting there, with the
Yes,
fingers going back. Yeah, I love that.
I'm the guy who's on a plane when everything is dark, and then my reading light is on, and everyone's annoyed. Me with the score.
I love it.
Yes.
I love it. I love it. Michael, how do you come to a new piece of music?
I open the score and I start to stare at it. I mean, really, it's not rocket science. You have to give it time to get inside you. My teacher used to say when he was young and slightly arrogant, and by the end of his life, he was anything but arrogant. He was one of the most humble people I'd ever met, and he knew everything. But he would open the score and he'd say, "Oh, especially if it was a piece that was already very well known, like a Beethoven symphony, a Brahms symphony. What can I do to this piece? How am I going to be different? Which is a terrible way to approach it, because I think Tony would agree, you try to find what the composer's intent was. And you don't have to worry, well, if you're always going back to textual information, that you're going to play like everybody else. That's literally impossible, because every human being is different, and you have a different set of both expectations, but also ideas and experiences that you're bringing to the task of letting this music in. But if you start with the idea that you could not write down the way these people did all these notes on the page, have respect for that. And when you're looking at the notes on the page, think, why did they write them that way? What does this, how does this mean? They gave you information. They gave you information as to how fast the music might go, how loud or soft it should be, what mood it should be, the direction of the phrase. Sometimes those things are not evident. So you have to imagine, with your knowledge of form and harmony and counterpoint, and where is the phrase and what is happening and what should be the emotional idea. But you have performances, even of this Rachmaninoff concerto, which are wildly different from different people, and all of them are compelling and great. So it's not a question that you're tied, handcuffed in some way if you try to approach a piece that way. On the contrary, it's very freeing, because then you can be totally yourself. But to answer your question more briefly, how do I do it? You get into the piece and you let the piece talk to you. Yeah, I don't like to listen to recordings. I will listen to a recording of mine of a piece that I'm coming back to see what I did last time. And invariably it irritates me, because you think, if only I could redo it now. Wait, I can redo it now. Okay.
Yes,
now let's
you
do
can.
it different. And it'll be different the next time you do it again. So that also for me underlines the fact that music is inexhaustibly fresh.
Yeah.
Unless you yourself are bored, music is never boring.
That's
right. And if you're bored, you don't have a right to be on the stage. So if you are totally tied in the moment with the music that you love, that will come across. And that's what makes it fun.
And et voila. And to all our listeners right now, that is the crux of the matter. Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Tony Siqi Yun. I mean, I'm so excited for you in this illustrious career you'll be having. It'll be exciting to see where you fly to from here. And I promise you that every time I see a Range Rover now, I'm going to think about you. Okay?
Yes.
I'll wonder if you're in it.
Just imagine wherever you say it'll be exciting to see where he flies to in his career. Guaranteed, he'll be annoying his neighbors on the seats to the left and to the right, because the overhead light will be on.
Happily so, to take part in that. And Michael, I just want to thank you again for being, and I've said this to you before when we've spoken, such an architect for orchestras. I do believe at the heart of you is a builder. You're like this fantastic woodworker, who's putting together so many new ideas. You are with your orchestras. It's very exciting. And the rebranding of Stanford Symphony, I think, is one of those, and significant.
I really appreciate what you're saying, and I'm touched that you should think that. I just didn't like the image, because a woodworker takes, I mean, I know that wood is living, but it's shaping a kind of inanimate object into something else. Organizations, musicians, orchestras, these are not inanimate objects. These are teams of people, of artists, and the trick is to build a climate where everybody wants to do something positive, forward-looking, and creative together. And when that happens, it's pretty nice.
It's magic. Well, I think there'll be magic this weekend at Orchestra Lumos with Michael Stern, music director, and Tony Siqi Yun at the piano playing the Rachmaninoff. We'll hear the Elgar, we'll hear the Gabriela Frank, and I'm excited to be there. I'm hoping everyone will come out for this fantastic concert and embrace Orchestra Lumos and their new mission. And thank you to both of you. Good luck with everything. Everyone out there, I think you can find tickets. Go to Palace Theater in Stamford and orchestralumos.org for more information about what is going on and the concerts carrying on from here. And I hope you'll visit centerstagewithpamelakuhn.com for more shows like this, all of my filmed interviews, and my WGCH talk radio interviews. So we support the arts in any way we can. And as Michael Stern has said, these concerts will lift you and will lift you out of the chaos of the world. Thank you for being with us. To everyone out there, I'm going to ask you, stay safe. This is Pamela Kuhn, and the curtain is now down on Center Stage.